Welcome to another episode of A Junior, a Senior and I. Today I'm extremely lucky because I'm joined by Remy and Stan to talk about legacy code. But before we get into the meat of the subject, let's meet our guests. Remy, could you introduce yourself in 3 sentences or less, please?
Hi, Pablo. I'm Remy Anquin. I live in Paris, France. I'm a Ruby developer. I've been working at Thoughtbot for a bit more than 2 years. And before that, I was working at Drivey/Getaround for a few years as well. And yeah, I had plenty of experience with legacy code.
Thanks.
Nice to see you.
What about you, Stan? You've been a recurring guest, but could you still introduce yourself, please?
I didn't think to prepare something different. Every time I should give another anecdote, I guess. But for the listeners, I'm Stan. I'm 35. I'm CTO at WeInvest. So we are a real estate agency franchisor, active in Belgium and France. And otherwise, my own experience with legacy code is I co-founded a company for 8 years named Robotics. We started with the 3 co-founders and ended up at 30 plus. And I had a team with 15 engineers. So it was funny to be the one to blame for most of the true legacy code, as I was the original author for the main code base. So that's my that's my penitence at Robotics. And then I worked at Recover, where essentially I tried at least to bring back an app that was not extremely paved with legacy code, but had some issues to tackle. So I think we'll talk a bit more about them today.
Thank you. And you mentioned in your introduction that you were, quote unquote, to blame for the legacy code at Robotics, which leads me to my first question. What is for you guys legacy code? Is it code made by someone else that we can blame, or is it something else? Remy, could you take us away? Oh, sorry, Stan, go ahead.
No, I was saying that it's sure is funnier to have someone to blame, but in my own experience, so my opinion is legacy code is kind of code that's not relevant anymore, and for that we have like a lot of different ways to look at it. Currently at WeInvest, legacy code is mainly code that doesn't fit the current state of business, so it doesn't really fit the strategy we have today. And it doesn't mean that it's not being used. It means that, for example, we could have something extremely complex for a part of the business that's not so important, or something extremely simple for a part of business that's expected to grow in the coming months/years. So that's kind of, the part of the code that's not really fitting and where you don't feel comfortable. That's what I would call legacy code. I don't know if you have something different in mind, Remy, for your past experiences.
I have some ideas that legacy code could be different things depending on how you look and what the code base looks like. It can be legacy because of dependencies, like it's an old code, old technology that's hard to maintain. It can be legacy code because we forgot the knowledge of it. It's working, but we don't know really how. We don't know how to change it. Could be also legacy because it's too complex. We just fear to break it anytime we change it. And it can be just legacy because it's very old.
A theme that permeates both of your answers is that it's code that doesn't change much, so that has gotten some rot, right? Like it can be either because, hey, we did this and we don't use it anymore and it's remained complex and we don't touch it because it's not our core business, or it's we don't dare touch it because developer X left. How can we apprehend that legacy code? Because sometimes, or most times, I would argue, we are called on to work on legacy code, right? It's rare that we work on greenfield projects. How can one make it so that they are effective in apprehending legacy code? Do you have strategies for that?
On my end, I think most of the time is to try to understand the why. It's not like someone would spend time at his work or her work writing code that's not relevant to anything, right? So usually understanding the why gives you clues, and then it becomes a fun game as well to track down the reasons, if there are any, as to why we ended up in this situation. But most of the time, it can be lack of expertise and experience, for sure. Right? You go into a project and you don't have the experience to actually tackle it in the best way possible. And I know for a fact that's what happened to me at first at Robotics. I was fresh out of school, and co-founding a company was extremely fun. But the classic from intern to CTO in the same company, that's what I did. And I had the experience of a junior, but with the responsibilities of a CTO for the app, I mean. And so responsible for the architecture and so on. And I made a lot of mistakes for that, obviously. That ended up into being legacy code a couple of years after. And so that's one why as to how we ended up in this situation. And I've noted a few as well. I don't know if, Remy, you have some whys we end up in situations you can share.
Absolutely. I mean, if you have to deal with legacy code, and let's say you don't have to change it, you just have to understand it first. First, you can have a look at the tests. Hopefully, there are some tests. Legacy code, it doesn't mean that there's no test, but sometimes legacy code is just not tested. If there are some tests, at least you can read them. You can have some context about what we want to test, what's the expectation, how it works. If there are no tests, it can be also an opportunity to try to write some. Like you try to read a little bit the code, you cover a little bit what's happening, so that at least if the code is working, if you don't have to change it, it's just the way it is. Then you can maybe document slightly the current behavior, so that the code is slightly less legacy. It starts to be something that is more owned by the team. But I can understand it. It might be a bit delusional sometimes to just want to add some tests to legacy code just like that. But at least it can help enter a new code base or enter a new really difficult feature that is containing legacy code.
What you're saying now reminds me something I read from Tim Ottinger, I think, where he was saying that his way to deal with untested code, for which he was not familiar with the why, was to record the what. So he would make the test run with a given context and record what it should give, and then start refactoring, right? Like it would do like quote unquote snapshot testing, and then start refactoring to try to get to the why. And it goes a bit with what you're saying, right? I'm guessing part of the contour of legacy code is code that is not owned by the team or by the individual. And this way of testing it can bring back some ownership. But I'm guessing, Remy, that because of where you work, you're not given a lot of time with different code bases, right? Like you go in a project and you have to apprehend it really quickly. And even though you want to get some ownership of it, it's not quote unquote permanent. Is there a different way of dealing with legacy when you work in that way?
It's true that you don't always have the time to change completely the code base. If you see there are some problems, but you were hired for some reasons, you cannot just change the whole code base just because you want to make the to make the code a little bit better. You have to focus on what you were hired for. But there is kind of a rule that you can apply, which is the Boy Scout rule, trying to just leave the place a little bit better. So you don't have to refactor everything. You don't have to clean completely the legacy code, but at least you can make it slightly better. If you have to change it, maybe you don't have to write the single line of code that you need for your problem, but you can maybe refactor one method or add one test, or maybe add some comment or documentation for the next person. When the team is missing knowledge because knowledge has disappeared after years, you can just write a little bit in the README, or maybe just the documentation on the code, and just make the next person have a better experience than you. So you're not fixing the legacy code, but you're making it slightly less legacy for the next person, which is probably you, actually.
Yeah, the classic you are three people, right? You are you from the past, you from the present, and you from the future. And Stan, is it a different outlook when you quote unquote own or will own a code base for the long run? Is it a different outlook in how you tackle this lack of ownership?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes and no. Like, I'm going to go back to something I've said, which is the business aligned with, the state of the code? What I mean is I don't really care about legacy code that just works for something in the business that's not so important. I don't need something that everyone understands, even though it has, issues and so on. But at the end of the day, we're always like making judgment calls on stuff like this. And so I'd rather spend time, energy, and therefore money on the core business, on the happy path or whatever you call it. And this is where I need the code to be readable, to be aligned in terms of complexity, in terms of test covering and whatever you want. So here on the happy path, I'm going to spend time going a bit further, as Remy pointed out. Maybe I'm going to expect the team to not just refactor the method, but you touch a class. Maybe you slice the class into subclasses, into modules, into if it makes sense. But you see what I mean? I do spend the additional effort on refactor. On the other end, at Drobotics, we had, for example, an invoicing system. It was so far from our business. We were not a fintech in any way, but we had a way to handle credit notes and invoices and so on. Yeah, if it works, don't touch it. Like, I don't really care. It's not your business. It's a mistake we've made, and we're going to pay the consequence at some point. But to be honest, it's extremely low on the scale. So that's kind of the judgment calls I usually make. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm just saying we're all working with restricted resources, and we never have time to do everything we want. So at the end of the day, aligning with the business, it's the number one priority for me.
I see. I'm getting a feeling after we've been recording for about 10 minutes or so that
Is it a good thing?
it's a feeling. I'm getting the feeling that in our mind, legacy code equals bad code, or at least that's what's permeating from our discussion. Is that also, in your opinions, what should permeate or not? I see Remy saying no with his head, so I'm gonna give him the floor.
I have a strong opinion about that. I really don't feel like legacy code is bad code. It's just code that's been there and might have some problem for some reason, but it doesn't have to be a problematic code. One thing I like to keep in mind is that if your code is legacy, it means that it's been there for a while. And if it's been there, it means that it's still working in some way. It means your business is still working, the code is still there. So it's not that bad. You might have some difficulties. It might be hard to work on it. It might be time consuming or not efficient. You might have many reasons to change it or to be afraid of it, but at least it's there. And it means that you're not in a bad position. So no, legacy code for me is not really bad, but it depends on what you want to do. If it's code that you need to change because there is a bug or there is a problem and you can't do it because the code is just completely messed up, then this is a problem. But maybe like you said, Stan, if the code is there, it's working, it's hard to understand, but you don't need to change it, it's not your main priority, then it's legacy code, yeah, but it's not a problem. It's just there, and maybe one day it will be, but it doesn't need to be your problem just because it's legacy.
It's kind of beautiful. Like legacy code is code you owe something to at that point. Where, yeah, thanks legacy code, you've you've done your job, and we have to thank you for it. That's nice. That's a nice feeling.
Assuming that legacy code then is a code that hasn't been touched for a while, let's say like that. How can we, as developers, make sure that the next person that needs to come and touch at this code that we don't know if it will be not touched for a while can grasp it quickly? Like, is documentation worth it? Is it a matter of adding tests? Is it a matter of explaining the whys somewhere? How would you make your legacy code, more workable in the present?
I like something that Remy said about tests, and I want to go a bit further with that. I think for those use cases, essentially in my mind, what I'm thinking is, once again, I know I'm saying that a lot, but what's the business of this code? Why was it created in the first place? So if I go back to the technical aspect of things, then I'm thinking, okay, I need some integration tests. I need to have the full picture, because I don't really care about the technicality of the code at that point in time, right? We're going to get to it. But first, I want to understand why it was there in the first place. And so if I'm getting into a legacy code base and I'm understanding the thing, I talked to the product people, if there are any, in a small startup that could be the CEO, where essentially in his mind, let's not name Alessandro from Recover. In his mind, he knows exactly how the app is supposed to work, right? Then the how the app is supposed to work, put that in an integration test, end-to-end test, whatever you call it. And then it serves, in my opinion, as documentation. And I think I might be reaching, but I think that's what you meant, Remy, like using the test as documentation, right?
Yeah, I have actually nothing to add. It's exactly my opinion. Just adding some tests for confidence, integration tests, just like you said, because it doesn't really matter at this point to get into really the details of the code. Unit tests are important, but that's when you really own completely the whole feature. But if you're in a position where you already fear it and you just want it to work, but to work in your context of your business, then yeah, the integration test is more important. At least with this test, you can start refactoring. You can even completely break the code, the structure, the API. Doesn't matter because the feature will still work because of the integration tests that don't focus on the technical part. We absolutely have the same opinion on that.
I do have a follow up there for Remy. So you said that integration tests would help you there, but they are also the most expensive kind of test, right? Like if I'm trying to get all the context possible in my integration tests, the test might run for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 minutes. And that's it. I don't really have a question other than comments, please.
Yeah. Here again, I'm going to go just through Stan. Integration tests are more for the happy path. You're not going to test all the edge cases with your integration tests. So if you only rely on integration tests, you're not going to have a very good time trying to cover everything. But that means that, okay, you have covered your legacy code with integration tests. The happy path is covered. Now you're getting more confident, but you have edge cases. First, you have to be sure that these are edge cases. They are not part of the happy path. So you're not just forgetting some important part of your feature. And then if it's just edge cases, for me here we're slightly moving to the really testing part, but I feel like it depends on what you need. Like if you really want to focus on the feature in the technical side, if you want to have something that is really well integrated, well maintained and maintainable with design patterns, something really, really big, and you want it to be on the technical side really perfect or great, then you will have the opportunity to add integration test. But if you either don't have the time or I don't know exactly how to say it, but you might waste less time starting with integrating the edge cases with integration tests. It's true that it slows down the CI, but at least it's covered. And again, it increases your confidence, it increases your ability to change it and to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And at some point, you will have so much confidence and so much knowledge about your code, even if it's legacy, that you will be able to restructure it and have more unit tests. And you will be able to get rid of the edge cases on integration tests. And then you will be happy, and you will not be talking about legacy code anymore, because it will be brand new code that you completely own, understand, and that is maintainable.
There's something you kept on saying is confidence. And I think for me, I just made another answer as to what's legacy code. Based on what you've just said, I think legacy code is code you're not confident with, maintaining or with it working by itself. It doesn't have to be old code, as you could have said, Pablo. Like, I like the definition of legacy code being code I don't have a lot of trust in, right? And so I'm trying to counteract this by writing integration tests, maybe documenting. Maybe it's a matter of interviewing Alès, or at least the CEO of the company, the product managers or whatever, but at least trying to bring back this trust into your code base.
I see. And until what point is it worth it to try to regain that confidence? Because I'm agreeing with both of you in that probably a good definition of legacy code is code that you're not confident in. And as Remy said, adding the specs and starting with integration specs will give you confidence, and you will be able to build upon that confidence to redo the whole thing. But when is it worth it? When is it not worth it? Like, is there a heuristic you use other than vibes for that?
Is it going to make money? At the end of the day, like, the company will live to see another day if it makes enough money. And so at the end of the day, if you want to choose which part of your legacy or how far you want to go into the cleaning or whatever you call it, at least the rewriting of stuff, yeah, look at where you make money from it. And that's, to be honest, one of the first, it's not obviously the only reason. You could have a lot of different ones. Like, I don't know, you have an old app in, sorry for the PHP people, but written in old PHP framework from the 90s. Yeah, good luck hiring people, senior developers with that, or just like hiring, period. Maybe you want to rewrite, and then it's not a matter of is it making money. It's another strategy as to, I know I'm gonna have to keep, a consistent flow of people, hiring a consistent flow of people. Then I need to switch. I used to work with Rails. Yeah, it's nice. It's niche, cool. If I were to work in a huge corporation, maybe I would rewrite some Rails modules into Java or whatever, just because the market is like so. So the answer is, depends on the strategy you have. And at the end of the day, that's just sharing my own experience and my own privileged positions. That's what makes the CTO job such an interesting and challenging job. Is you have this kind of calls to make, not every day, but that's your responsibility, and that's what makes it super interesting, because it merges a lot of different, kind of responsibilities, from the very technical side of things to the business side of things, and how one can influence the other. And legacy code is extremely important in that balance.
Remy, anything to add on that?
Yeah, in the same vibe, I would say, how much is it hurting the team and hurting the product? So you might not have money from it, but you might lose money from it. And that's where you have to have a nice collaboration between the folks who write the code, the folks who read it, the folks who use it, and basically the whole company. I don't say that the whole company needs to be aware of the code, but it's a team effort. I feel it's a bit like if you have a room where you're every day in this room and you have furniture, and the furniture might not be well placed, but you can still move into the room and you can do whatever business you do, and it's fine. And one day you hurt your foot in the furniture and it hurts, but it's the first time. It's okay. It was a bit painful, but it's all right, and you can continue. And then you do it again and again, and at some point it's just hurting you every day, and maybe twice a day. And then you can see a pattern where, okay, it's not just something I can avoid, it's something that's actually hurting me constantly. And then you're losing time, you're losing money for your product, for investing on something else. And now you can have a feeling, okay, this is now a problem. Before it was something a bit annoying, but we could deal with it. And now it's actually preventing us from doing better things. And I feel that's, even if it's a feeling, because I can't tell you it's X amount of hours working on it, but at some point you will have this feeling, okay, this is actually preventing me from doing something better.
That's a wonderful metaphor, like feng shui based development. It's perfect. Like, I could see myself into this room. That's insane.
And is there something you can look at to give you indications? Are there indicators that tell you, okay, other than the scars that get created because of the injuries you keep getting in a file? Because we all know that file. We all know that feature. Yeah, don't touch that. You want to change that? It's going to be 3 months because we have to redo the whole thing. I have several examples in mind. I will not share them today, but we all know that feature, right? But there are some that are borderline. Are there indicators you guys use for that?
There are some tools for code analysis. I don't remember them. I might remember them at some point. Maybe we can add them into the notes. But there are some way to just analyze your code. You can see the code that is complex, like really getting into the internals there. But as developers, we can see if the code is complex. We can see if there is a lot of churn. Like if there is a file that is both complex and you have to change it like twice a week for some reasons, then it means, okay, it's actually taking you a lot of time to do it. Because you might change like a JSON file for configuration every day, but you know exactly where the keys are. It's okay. You can change it lots of time and it's all right. You can also have a very complex file, but you change it twice a year. It's a bit complex. It takes a bit of time, but it's just twice a year. But if it's complex and has a lot of churn, then okay, there might be room for improvement. That's where you probably want to make it easier for the next person to edit.
Stan, I see you nodding along. I don't know if you have something to add or just yes, I agree completely.
No, that's very true. I think at the end of the day, we are always, we have these, I believe, as developers, these scientific minds, and we want to have something measurable and everything. And agreed, that's the best measurable way you can put in place. I mean, that I know of at least. But yeah, depends once again. Like a third axis to that would be whether or not the company wants to grow in that direction. In my opinion, I'm becoming kind of a cliche of myself here, where I'm always trying to bring some business into the conversation. But I really believe, and that's something that I kind of missed at Dropbotics. That I did pretty badly, I believe, trying to have the business approach. But yeah, agreed with Remy, and I would add a third axis with whether or not it fits the strategy of the company.
You said that you're becoming I don't know the term you use, but a caricature of yourself, I think you said. But it actually gives me a good segue because we went to a layer of abstraction that was really quote unquote low level with the churn, with the complexity, and there you can look at cyclomatic complexity or ABC branching, etc. But I believe there are more layers of abstractions in the legacy discussion, and that's something you brought up in our preparation, Stan. What are the layers that might make code legacy? Because there is the code complexity, there is the time, but are there other dimensions that are there?
I might sound a bit repetitive, but for me, it's mainly the confidence. But again, the confidence can come from different things. Either you lost the knowledge, so you're not confident to change it just because you don't know it. It might not be complex code, it might not be that legacy, but you don't know it. So, it takes you a lot of time to onboard. It might be great code, like very, very detailed, very well structured, but extremely sensitive. Maybe it's slightly different than legacy code, but for the sake of the conversation, let's say it's legacy code. I remember in a previous company, there was some code in the finance department. The code was amazing, written by very experienced folks, but it was just very sensitive, because we were dealing with people's money. So you can't just refactor something and hope it will work. You need to have a very, very sensitive approach. And then it becomes a legacy because you don't have the confidence to change it. You need to be extremely experienced with this code, even if the code is amazing. And it can be confidence because you don't know the technology. If it's an outdated technology, you need to upgrade. It's the framework, 3 versions in the past, and then you have to upgrade everything. And okay, if I try to touch something, I am actually going to refactor everything, and it's going to take me a week. Or sometimes it's more basic and it's actually just bad code. Not to be judgmental, but sometimes the code is just not good, just not well written, not well abstract, and it's just hard to have. I don't know if I'm really helping with the question, because it's really like, it depends. I don't want to summarize everything by it depends, but it's kind of a feeling anyway. Yeah, depends on how confident you are with the code for many different
One
reasons.
thing, and I'm gonna be a bit meta here, grasping on what Remy said. One thing I'm getting with the conversations I'm having with folks that know more than I is that everything boils down to it depends, and you should add tests, at least in software development or most things. No, I see what you mean. That, and again, it comes back to the confidence you might have in a system, right? And that can be, for various reasons, can decrease with time. And I think that those two dimensions will come to define legacy code, right? Like, because although some code is born quote unquote untrustworthy from day one, time will make any code untrustworthy.
Yeah, I think even from day one, like there is, I might title that "How to Write Legacy Code 101." The easiest way to write legacy code is to have a startup that changes their mind, or as we call it, pivot. The day you pivot, your happy path changes. So the business says, "Hey, the new happy path is over there," and all the previous code base is now legacy code. So it's the easiest way to label code as legacy is to change your business. And I'm saying it a bit sarcastically here, but to be honest, this can be prevented. Not the pivots that I'm obviously oversimplifying. There are very good reasons to pivot. Not the topic for today, but what I think can work in favor of not having too much legacy code, or at least building resiliency in your code base, is to have an open communication channel in between developers, technical people, and the business side of things. Because when that happens, you understand the meaning behind the features. And I know I'm bypassing product managers and tremendous respect for everybody doing a product job. But at the end of the day, it's not just product, is whether or not we're going to actually willing to bet on that feature, right? Is that a marketing feature, a marketing stunt? Like, we want to raise money and we want to have crypto and AI in the pitch deck. Fine. I would have screamed a couple of years ago, and now I'm being fine. I'm going to do it on the side. I'm going to put it in a well isolated place. It's not going to touch the main code base, but we're still going to have this feature, right? But if the communication is clear enough, I know it's going to be a marketing stunt or a moonshot or whatever, and maybe it's going to work out, but that's fine. But if we know we're actually building this not for a marketing page, but actually because that's our core business and we believe, and maybe we're going to be wrong, but that's the game, right? But we believe it's going to be the way to go. And then we're going to have those layers. We're going to have the patterns, and we're going to bring, the full machine to the combat. And that's, I believe, one way to counteract a bit the fact that we get legacy codes so easily or not is, okay, let's talk about this, and let's talk about what do you hope for this feature, right?
I like this aspect about communication, because as developers, I feel like there is like a trade-off to have, which is not always easy to have. Like, you have to, with the relationship you have with the code and sometimes your own code, you might spend a lot of time working on something, make it great. And I feel like there is a trade-off as developers. You have to be attached a bit about the code so that you prevent some decisions to just break everything every morning, to update everything, to change the technology. I like working with Rails. It can be seen as a boring technology sometimes, but I love it for it because the framework has been there for 15 years and the code base are still working, and we don't have to change the whole stack every 6 months. So you have to have like this relationship, willing to maintain code that is now legacy, but also you have to be pragmatic and to be able to just drop everything, or maybe not everything, but to drop a big feature that you worked hard on for 2 years, just because, like you said, the business changed. Something that was legacy is just not relevant anymore, and you need to change it. it's a bit hard sometimes. You have to be dedicated to prevent big changes. You, as a developer, you have also a role of guidance. You are here to say, okay, if we do this feature, if we do it this way, it's going to cost this much, and it's going to become a problem maybe in the future if we do it this way. So you have a role of guidance, but also you need to be able to let go sometimes and just accept that sometimes we want to change everything and to break things and to drop things. So it's a bit hard. You have this kind of relationship where you're attached and you're able to let go at any point.
I think that's what becoming a senior is. I've been asked that a lot in the past, and I've been trying to, every time I was in a company, to define it, because essentially, if my thinking process is, if I'm able to define what a senior is, then I'm able to give perspective to the people in the team as to what to look forward to. And I believe a good software engineering senior person is able to communicate, able to ask those questions, and could not agree with you more, able to defend the fort, but able to let go when the time has come for it to go. It's a very, very nicely put.
It has sparked a couple of questions on my end as well. I'm going to start with the most controversial one, because you said that what you like in Rails is that it's stable and it doesn't change, and basically it's backwards compatible, etc., etc. But arguably, that's one of the main drawbacks of JavaScript, at least in the browser, right? Like, you cannot change how dates work, for example, because you would break the internet. And so dates are cursed. And depending on what you use, you might get a date or another, and whatever. And that happens with a lot of things of JavaScript, a lot of functionalities, because they cannot, quote unquote, let go of legacy code, and they need to remain stable. And I'm not talking about the whole framework ecosystem on top. So I guess my question is, when is too much stability too much? Where is that line in which, okay, we need to actually be able to move forward?
Your example is really hard to work with, because for JavaScript, for breaking the browsers, it makes sense that the language is stuck for some things, because if I compare with Rails, for example, it's working on servers, so I am the only one using it. And if we change the language, there's way less web servers running old versions of Ruby than there is web browsers in every people's computer. So this is a curse for JavaScript, but they need to maintain this legacy, because now the language is so popular and is running everywhere on every single piece of computer. They need to have this compatibility. So I would say, for your example, they need to maintain it for a long time, because if they don't, you're breaking actually the computer of millions of people. I know I'm not really helping, but yeah, it depends really on the technology. If we take another example, let's move slightly off the JavaScript, which is really hard to work on. But yeah, if you're using an old technology that is not well maintained anymore, you mentioned it, Stan. At some point, you will have problems to hire, you will have problems to maintain, you will have problems just finding the knowledge or just working with it, with the new technologies. So I'm not saying if the technology is old, you need to change it. But again, it depends if you're hurting yourself, if you're losing time and money maintaining something and it's a burden, it might be a good time to change it if it's something you can afford. Because again, with your JavaScript example, you cannot just afford to update every single piece of computer in the world.
Sure. And the other question that was sparked in the discussion, and it comes a bit into what Stan said about the fastest way to create legacy code is to pivot. Should we, as software developers, be more aggressive in removing code? Like, when something is not used anymore, should we be less scared of just, okay, fuck it, let's go, we remove it and we build something new, or we build this other thing, or this is not a path anymore? Because everywhere I've worked on, at least on the business side, there is fear of removing features. Should we push more for feature removal?
Yes. Remove everything. I've I've been heavily inspired by, I think the name of the serum is June, I believe. It's not the serum I've used, but it's a product I've followed because they had, to be honest, excellent marketing on LinkedIn, and they advocated for feature removal at some point, and I could not agree with them more. The goal is, I mean, they were saying essentially that after a couple of years, you know, we all have this feature creep where we add this extra thing, extra thing, extra thing. And at the end of the day, if you don't track feature usage, then obviously you're never going to remove everything, because what if someone is using it, right? But if you do, you can realize that actually, oh yeah, maybe some people are using it, but it's like 5% of the user base. And going back to the business and the money side, maybe it's 20% of the user base, but they bring 80% of the revenue because they're the biggest clients. So hell no, we're not going to touch that. But on the other side of the Pareto spectrum, maybe it's like a fairly big amount of people, but they're not bringing any revenue. And then the conversation becomes very interesting as to what's the cost of maintaining the feature in terms of people, in terms of performance, in terms of legacy code, for example. But yeah, I'm personally a big fan of anything I can remove, I will. It's a debate we had with Pablo a couple of days ago. I don't believe I've worked in companies where we make complex products. The product ended up being complex because of, in my opinion, bad decisions. And it can be misinformed and a lack of expertise or whatever. But I believe most of the products we are building are glorified spreadsheet or forms. And at the end of the day, if we can remove features because we don't benefit from being able to enter formula in a spreadsheet cell, remove it, simplify. I'm a big fan of simplifying stuff.
At Thoughtbot, we have a Slack channel called Dead Code Society, and we share daily daily on it. Screenshot of I don't know how to call it, but the diff on GitHub when you make a pull request, and when we have more red than green, so more lines you remove than lines you add, we share it just because we love removing code, we love deleting it, because code that is not there is code you don't have to maintain anymore. So we love that.
The channel name is excellent.
I completely agree with monitoring. It's really something that is extremely, I mean, we work with APIs, we work with, relationship between one software and another. So it's just for making it working first, it's extremely important to understand what's used. But yeah, in terms of dead code, it's not always easy to know what code is dead. And sometimes you just spend hours or days maintaining something that is actually not used anymore. But you can't know it until you have some code analysis or tooling. And then when you remove it, you just leverage completely your abilities. I would just slightly say that, like you mentioned, Stan, it also depends a little bit on if it's worth it in terms of business. You could have legacy code for a long time, even if it's not that easy to work with, even if it's a boring or an outdated technology. But if it's working for the business the way you want, it might be cheaper to just leave it this way. Like you have a legacy way of seeing some screens on your app that's using outdated technology. But if you change it, it's a 2-month worth of code and of work, and it's just not worth it. So you better spend this money on something else that is more valuable for your users and for your business. So drop everything. I wouldn't say that, like, drop everything that doesn't matter, drop everything that's hurting. And sometimes it's okay to just keep things that are just not worth changing.
I'd like to add that there is an aspect which we don't really touch, and I believe it's extremely important, is the mental load as well on developers and software engineers. At the end of the day, most of the time we're adding features, right? It's kind of rare, at least in my experience, that we would actively go remove features because the product said, yeah, let's remove these features. And it's like a game we can't win. We can have a mental mind map of, I don't know, X working features, but in a couple of years, it's going to be 3, 4, 10 times as many behavior, and it's going to become, instead of having a few connections, it's going to become a spider web, and maybe multiple spider webs integrated amongst one another. And at that point in time, it's not like I'm advocating to be omniscient about the code base. I don't believe it's possible, and it shouldn't be an objective, in my opinion. But we have to remember that the less we have, the easier it is for anyone to get onboarded on a more global aspect of the code base. If I have thousands of lines instead of hundreds, if I have millions instead of thousands, it's kind of very obvious which one is easier to grasp, right? And so legacy code is part of that and has a big role to play, cleaning up after ourselves, making sure that we monitor, making sure that we're removing stuff that's not being used for the sake of the code base, but for the sake of the developers as well.
I agree, and I'm noticing the time, and we're running out of it. But before we leave, I'd like to ask you a question. What would you advise to someone more junior that is confronted with this issue of legacy code? What tips would you give that person?
Don't trust AI. Just trust the people. As junior, at least. Like if you're entering a new code base, just don't send it to the AI and ask, "What can I do?"
For legal reasons, most. But yes.
Okay. And what about you, Stan?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't see the AI aspect because I'm kind of a boomer in that aspect. I'm not a fan, Pablo. But yeah, no, like really piling on something I've said a couple of times now. Even as a junior, you need to talk to the product people, the sales people, that whoever is the stakeholder of most of the knowledge, right? Because I would say I would agree with don't trust the AI, but I would even say don't trust the code base. It's not because the code base is indicating that we're doing something this way that it was meant to be this way, right? It could have been something that was misunderstood or badly represented because I didn't know the concept at the time, so I put in a pattern that was not appropriate or whatever. So in an ideal world, I would have an up-to-date documentation on a wiki somewhere that was an emphasis on up-to-date. So never. But anyway, let's say ideal world. I have an up-to-date documentation and I can read why I'm sending invoice reminders this way. It's because I expect the result to be this, this, and that. And we did it in a such complex way because of X, Y, and Z, right? And so that would be the starting point. Because no one has this, because no one has the money to do this, at our scales at least. Yeah, talk to the people. Talk to the people really and really drill down the people in charge of those features, in charge of the stakeholders, and understand why it was done this way. And so it's hard to do as a junior because you might lack the authority, the confidence, the legitimacy to do this kind of stuff. So then it becomes the role of the person who's in charge of onboarding you. Your tech lead, your team lead, your CTO, your manager, whatever you call it, this person. But you need to have those answers. You need to understand the strategy behind. And yeah, it can turn into a career advice as well. If you do this, you're going to be such a better person. I mean, not a person, but such a better developer. Not judgments here. Such a better developer that you'll be able to grasp things way easier, and you're going to be so much more efficient, right? Because every time you're going to nail the feature, it's going to do exactly what was intended to do. And if your startup is not pivoting every 3 months, that's another issue. But if the company is more or less stable, you're going to make features that are always going to be as complex as they should. They're going to be delivering value. And a couple of years later, yes, your code will be legacy because it's going to be old, but it's still going to be relevant. And that's just what you should aim at. Extremely long answer. Sorry.
It's okay.
too passionate
it's okay.
about this.
It was a really good answer and a great send-off. Thank you very much to both of you for having been here with me today. It was really interesting and I learned a lot. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. It was really nice.
Yeah, thanks, Remy, for you have a knack for just making some really hard concepts into easy to understand metaphors. It's fascinating.
Thanks.